We're going to look at schedules and what does your day or your class period look like with face-to-face students as well as your virtual students. So the goal is we want you to visualize what the first 2 days will look like. We want you to have a plan for the first for Monday and Tuesday and gather ideas from others over what this can look like moving forward. So what we wanted you to do first is look at what are you doing well already during virtual learning. So if you look at this Jamboard, there's a lot of different ideas of what is going well. A lot of you have created a lot of engaging activities. You have learned how to use different tools for formative assessment and for your delivering lessons. So utilize those strengths. Your students already know how to use these tools. They're already comfortable with their Chromebook and their platform. So those are things that the kids already know how to do. So how can we utilize those strengths in face-to-face as well as our virtual students? So if we move to the next slide, we're going to look at what asynchronous activities can the virtual students be doing on day one. So the first day is going to be very busy with your face-to-face students. So what can your virtual students be doing on that day? So there's a lot of good ideas on here. A lot of people said they're going to record lessons and continue the lessons, maybe review over content that's already been made. Also, those students are going to have some different guidelines and expectations because they're used to you being at the computer all day long, and that's not going to be the case anymore. You're going to have to tell them, when are you going to check in, or when are you available? How are they going to contact you? And just to know that you're not going to be there the whole time because you have in-person students. So what is that going to look like for your virtual students? And you'll need to let them know before next week, what is the plan for those first few days, and when will you check in with them? So they'll need to know that plan early, before that week starts for next week. So what are your face-to-face kids going to do on day two? Normally, content where you are going to start teaching content. So if you can focus on the face-to-face students and what is that lesson cycle going to look like on day two. So we have a few ideas here. One of them, this one is, and I'll make it a little bit larger, is an I do, we do, you do method. Let's see if I can move some of these out of the way so we can see this a little bit. I'll move those back. So for example, for your face-to-face students, you might have a whole group instruction using the whiteboard. So I'm giving those instructions, I'm modeling that, and maybe we use manipulatives and individual whiteboards for guided practice. And then I'll use a self-paced pear deck for them to use it during independent practice and for their reflection. So that's just an example of what I might do with my face-to-face students. Make this smaller, kind of move this back. So you can kind of look at some of these, and what I noticed is this is what we are already doing. We're already doing these things, and you're just kind of moving them to the face-to-face students. So it's a lot of whole group notes practice, using Pear Deck, Class Kick, things like that, the tools that we are already using. So that's great. So we're going to move now to our website. We want to look at schedules real quick before we come back to this Jamboard and talk about our virtual students. So on this website, we have Things to consider for the first day. Again, encourage we're going to encourage you to let your students know what that first day is going to look like for them, because they will probably be asynchronous that day. There's going to be a lot going on at your campus. You have to teach routines and expectations to your face-to-face students. And so that day may be just a check-in with your students to make sure, your virtual students. We have some questions to consider. So, good things to think about when you're starting to plan. When's your conferencing? How are you going to continually to formatively assess? And then these are our different schedules. This first schedule, you're doing everything the same. So, face to face students and your virtual students are getting the same instruction. They're doing guided practice, independent work, and the closure. Everything is the same. And so whatever you're doing with the face-to-face students, you're also doing with the virtual students. So we have a little scenario at the top that kind of guides you on what this would look like. And then we have some pros and cons down below as well. So this might be one way that you run a lesson in your classroom. And again, you're not stuck to one schedule. Your schedule may change from one lesson to the next or from one class period to the next. But these are just examples of what your classroom might look like. So let's move to Schedule B. On Schedule B, you may have a flipped instruction for your virtual students, maybe an ed puzzle that they're going to start with so you can focus on your face-to-face students. You would then come back together to practice, maybe on the board or ClassKick or some other tool, and then giving them independent work. Maybe that's on ClassKick as well, as you're monitoring and adjusting your instruction, and then your closure would be together. So really your instruction is a little bit different in that, and this may flip-flop the next day. Maybe you have your face-to-face students doing flipped instruction as you're focusing on your virtual students. So again, we have a scenario at the top, kind of help you walk through that, and then we have pros and cons below. So this kind of allows you to focus on one group at a time for your instruction and your modeling. So we're going to move to Schedule C. Schedule C is your virtual students are doing everything synchronously, as your virtual students they have a flipped instruction. They may have a pair deck or slides that they work on at their own pace, and then they meet in with you during the reflection and the closure. And again, this could be flip-flopped. So the virtual students on this one, they're doing a lot of their learning on their own. And again, maybe the next day you could flip-flop this where your face-to-face students are doing this and you're focusing more on your virtual students. So these are 3 different schedules. Again, you do not have to fit into any of these. Maybe you have your own idea what your schedule is going to look like for that lesson cycle. And it may change from one lesson to the next. So if we go back to our Jamboard, we're going to look at how are you going to integrate learning for your virtual students on this day. So if you think back, we talked about what is our face-to-face students going to do, and now we have to look at that same lesson. What are we going to do with our virtual students? So if we look at day 2, and if we remember back, this math lesson, whole group instruction using the whiteboard, using manipulatives and individual whiteboard for guided practice. Self-paced pair deck will be used for independent work and reflection or closure. I could do this same thing with my virtual students if I choose to. So some of you did say that you would be doing the same thing with your virtual kids as you would do with your face-to-face kids. Others said that you would have recorded instruction for those face-to-face students and they would be working independently as teacher gives feedback and formatively assesses throughout the day. So you have to kind of figure out your schedule, what that's going to look like, visualize it, implement it, and then reflect upon it. That way you can adjust as you go. Again, it's going to take a little while for your students to get used to this transition, but I know that it's going to work out and it's going to be great once we get into the groove of teaching both face to face as well as our virtual students. Thank you for joining us. We have the website that also has different pieces to it: logistics, schedule, student partner, and teacher partner. And phase 2 will be coming soon. And your principal should have the link to this website.